Back in 2004, my husband and I were given 3 of our grandchildren to raise. The boys were aged 1.5, 3, and 4.5 years old. The boys were followed a few months later by their sister, a newborn, who was also given to us to raise. After having raised our own children, my husband and I found ourselves once again new parents. We lived in a small town in New England, so small that you could step out of the house and see the police station, fire department, and post office just beyond the house. When I was young, we had stop signs downtown where the stoplights are now. My grandmother and grandfather were born there, and I lived there for 6 decades in that town. It was the kind of place where if you needed vegetables for supper, you went to a neighbor's house who had a garden, took what you needed, and left the money on their front porch. We lived there on the main street, but we were surrounded by many forested acres. 3 rivers ran through the town, and we had a large field behind our house. There were many fields throughout the town, and the other towns nearby were of similar makeup. There were also many farms in the area and the neighboring towns as well. They were very New England-type towns, small, comfy, and cozy. When the children first came to live with us, both my husband and I worked. He worked at the transit company in a local city, and I worked as a paralegal. My job was a total of a 4-hour commute, 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours at night. I would be gone from the house 12 hours a day at a minimum. I often worked on weekends too. My husband took a leave of absence from his job and stayed home with the children for 2.5 years. When he returned to work, he would work the night shift. That enabled him to watch the children during the day. He did his best with the children while I was at work, and given the circumstances, he did a good job. One day after work, when the youngest children were 6 and 4 respectively, I came home to find the house in a state of disarray. Supper hadn't been made, and the kids were running up to me with quite a story about a big gorilla that had been outside all day. The 2 youngest let me know that during the afternoon they saw a big gorilla in front of the house running along the street. They said it was very fast. Then, the big gorilla jumped our picket fence and ran into our yard. The children said that they had their noses pressed against the window pane, and the big gorilla came up to the window, growled at them, and then pushed its paws against the window. The children said that they tried to wake up my husband, who had fallen asleep on the couch, but they couldn't rouse him. The big gorilla ran into the backyard where it broke some car windows and threw about some trash cans. I didn't disbelieve the children. It was just that I was too exhausted to deal with it, and responded with my "that's nice" comment that I used for anything I couldn't handle at the moment. I do recall reading in the newspaper a few days later that the police were warning folks about vehicle damage, but I never gave it any further thought. I didn't give it any further thought even though a few years prior to the big gorilla incident, I had seen a very large dead wolf that I presumed had been hit by a car laying on the roadside. It was not a coyote, nor was it a coy dog that we had in the area. I had seen pictures of wolves, and this one was immense. I had personally seen coy dogs while riding my horse along the trails. The wolf body was gone the next day, and no mention by the authorities of any wolf sightings was in the newspaper. I thought that was sort of unusual. Did we have wolves in our area? Wouldn't that be newsworthy? Did anyone else see this wolf? Obviously someone had, because its body was gone the following day. I also didn't give the big gorilla story much further thought, even though years before the children came, both my husband and I had witnessed a large dog-type footprint in our backyard. We mentioned those prints to a friend of ours who was the animal control officer in a nearby town, who didn't seem too surprised by our find. However, we never discussed it any further. I didn't give the big gorilla story much thought either, even though about this time we saw the large dog prints in our backyard, and our cats had started to go missing. I found one of our cats, Peter, the best hunter in town, high up on a neighbor's roof. The house was 3 stories with the first floor and second floor occupied by tenants, with an attic on the 3rd floor. Lots of the older homes in New England always had full attics. I called for Peter and I managed to get into the building and climbed up to the 2nd floor with a clothes basket. I climbed up on the porch railing and put the basket above my head, up to the house gutters, and Peter eventually dropped in it. Thankfully, we managed to save our wonderful cat. Even some of our friends asked why Peter was on the roof. Peter wasn't scared of anything, but I still was not connecting the dots. But back to the big gorilla story. When the children got a little older, we moved to North Carolina. It was in North Carolina when the children were nearer their teen years that I found a Dogman Encounters program on YouTube. I listened intently to the narratives on the program. Recently, while driving down the street, I connected the dots. The idea of it jolted me and my brain awake. Wait a minute, I thought. Did they say big gorilla and something very fast when the children told me their story? Did the children have an encounter with something those years back? I immediately spoke with our 12-year-old and 14-year-old separately. Do you remember that time that you told me the story about the big gorilla? The 12-year-old energetically told me every single thing she remembered. She said the animal was very large and very fast. It was covered in long black hair and had a long bushy tail. It growled, and it had paws with fingers. It had stood up and pushed up on the window with those paws. It ran very fast and jumped over the fence. It had ran into the backyard and made a lot of noise while it was breaking things. The 12-year-old told me that it didn't have the face of a gorilla or a monkey, but she couldn't tell more about the face because of all the hair. The 14-year-old shivered when I asked if he remembered it. He said that he would never forget that thing coming into the yard. He remembers it clearly, as if it were yesterday. He too remembers the swiftness of the creature and the black hair that covered it, and how it jumped over the fence and was running amok from the front yard into the backyard. He said he still has no idea what it was, but he hopes that he never sees anything like that again. The children now know about Dogman, Bigfoot, and other cryptids. They didn't when they saw the big gorilla, though. Neither did I. We all had received our education from listening to programs like yours. We weren't aware that Dogman don't always stay in the forest. They're often seen among neighborhoods, and perhaps, just perhaps, the creature that my children saw all those years ago was just that, a Dogman in a small New England town. Bennington County, Vermont, 2003. A Winooski man believes that he saw a Bigfoot-type creature at dusk while driving north on Route 7 on Wednesday. At about 7:10 p.m., Ray Dufresne, 45, was heading back up north after visiting his daughter at Southern Vermont College when he spotted a 6-foot-plus tall, 270-pound, big black thing walking upright near the highest point of elevation on Route 7. It was hairy from the top of its head to the bottom of his feet, said Dufresne. It was not walking like a normal person. Although Dufresne could not see the animal's face, he said from his vantage point, which was about 140 feet away, he could see that the creature had very long arms and was covered in long black hair. He said it walked east into the woods toward Glastonbury Mountain. The first thing I thought was this was a gorilla costume. I thought it was a joke, he said. Then I put two and two together. There were no houses or abandoned cars nearby, so Dufresne surmised that this dark creature could not have been a person. Furthermore, Dufresne has been an avid hunter since the age of 15, and he says he knows his animals. It was not a moose or a bear, he said. Although he had heard of the Bigfoot phenomenon before, Dufresne said he had never heard of anything happening like that in Vermont. Dufresne also attested that he had not been drinking or doing drugs on Wednesday, and he has no history of mental illness. Why would somebody be walking down the road like that? Dufresne said he asked himself at the time. I kicked myself for not turning back. Dufresne continued driving north to his home. He said that at his job at a car dealership in Burlington on Thursday, people were having a laugh at his expense when he retold his story. Lieutenant District Chief Dane Hathaway of the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department said that that was the first time he had heard of anything like that during his 32 years working for the state. His view on the sighting was a down-to-earth one. It was a black bear, said Hathaway. He said that black bears do stand on their hind legs, and in some cases they can actually walk on their hind legs. Trained bears do it all the time, he said. It doesn't happen very often, but they do that. People see a lot of strange things in the woods, said Hathaway, like catamount. But these often turn out to be tricks of the mind. Your mind does strange things to you sometimes, he said. Retired game warden Bob Munley, 73, of Bennington, said that during his 35 years with the state, he has had a lot of strange calls, but none quite like the one Dufresne describes from Wednesday. He, like Hathaway, believes that the creature was probably a moose or a bear, as they both have dark fur. The mind tells you what you think you saw, says Mumley. However, Dufresne is not the only one to report strange sightings of such creatures in the Bennington area. In fact, the New York Times reported on October 18, 1879, that 2 young Vermont hunters saw a wild man while hunting in the mountains south of Pownell. The Times said that on October 17, 1879, the 2 young men described the creature as being about 5 feet high, resembling a man in form and movement, but covered all over in bright red hair, and having a long, scraggly beard with very wild eyes. When first seen, the creature sprang from behind a rocky cliff and started for the woods nearby. When mistaking it for a bear or other wild animal, one of the 2 men fired, and it is thought wounded it, for the fierce cries of pain and rage. It turned on its assailants, driving them back at high speed. They lost their guns and ammunition in the fight, and dared not to return for fear of encountering the strange being. Other accounts are much more recent. According to a report printed at the Space on the Run newsletter website in December 1989, a man from Eden in Lamoille County found footprints in the snow measuring 12 to 14 inches in length and about 6 inches wide. This was in an area that was about 10 miles from the nearest house. In East Haven in October 1976, a woman who was reading in the woods saw something like the creature that Dufresne saw. It had a muscular neck, a large head, and broad shoulders. It stood between 8 to 11 feet in height, with ape-like hair and long arms. A similar account and description was given by a boy in Essex Junction in 1994.